And here to give us some more information about today's court ruling is our legal analyst, Dion Jackson-Miller. Dion, welcome. First of all, for those of us who have forgotten, what are the facts of the case as it relates to Mr. Clarke?
Well, let's look at a timeline first, Herman, and if we could bring up the first slide, because Jamaica in her story made mention of the 8 months. But let's look at what actually happened. The state of emergency in St. James was declared January 18, 2018. Now, Mr. Clarke was detained on Valentine's Day, February 14. Now, for 3 months, he didn't hear what was the basis for his detention. It was in May that he was given a copy of the detention order. The tribunal heard his matter in June, and it was on August 30, 2018 that the tribunal ordered him released, but it wasn't until a month later that he was actually released, and the court made special mention of that, calling it egregious that he should have been held for an additional month after the tribunal had ordered his release.
Okay, well, based on the ruling now, is it that the government can no longer set up states of emergency?
And that's really important, because it's important to say that that's not what the court said. The court has not said that states of emergency are unconstitutional. The court did not say that the government cannot establish states of emergency. What they did was to say sections of the regulations were too broad. Think, Herman, if you want to kill a mosquito, right? What the court has said is that the force you have to use to kill the mosquito has to be proportionate. So you can come so and kill the mosquito. What you can do is bring in a big sledgehammer and come whoodoof. And the court said that is what was happening with these regulations. So, for instance, this court said that you first have to have what they call a legitimate aim for bringing these laws that are going to infringe rights. And they said there was a legitimate aim, the scourge of crime and violence, the gang feuding that was going on in St. James. But having said there's a legitimate aim now, were the laws, the regulations themselves proportionate and reasonable, and that is where the government fell down on that.
Okay, well, you have read through the court's written judgment. I think it was 66 pages. What are some of the other key points that were highlighted by the judges?
There were a number of important points. So, for instance, the court referenced a number of the regulations that were held to be unconstitutional, and we could bring up another of the slides here in relation to some of the specific points that were made. So, for instance, there was a particular regulation that the court looked at, and where the court said, or the law said rather, that people could be taken into custody, could be deprived of their freedom in a situation where they were deemed to be infringing on public safety or the preservation of the peace. And the court said, no, that's too wide, because public safety can be infringed, for instance, by a traffic violation. The preservation of the peace can be infringed in a situation in which you're demonstrating in front of the courthouse. And the court said, if what you want to do is target gangsters, target gangsters. Don't put in place a regulation that is so broad that so many people are affected that have nothing to do with your aim, which, remember, is to restrict gang violence. There was another particular ruling of the court that I wanted to comment on because it was so important. What the regulations did was it allows the minister to decide whether or not a detention order should remain in place. So even after the tribunal has ruled and the tribunal says that, hey, this person should be released, the minister can decide whether to uphold the order, revoke the order, or vary the order. And the court had some very strong words here, and if we could bring up that particular slide, the court said what this is absolute power in the hands of one person to deprive an individual of his liberty, and it was not okay. It is neither rationally connected to the legitimate aim, it is disproportionate, and also it lends itself to abuse, and it is undemocratic, which is very strong wording for a court in a situation like this.
Okay. All right. Final question. The award that was granted, $17.8 million. Can you give us an idea how the court actually arrived at this figure?
The court looked at different types of damages. So 12 million of that is what is called compensatory damages, to compensate Mr. Clarke for having been deprived of his liberty. Then the court gave an additional 4 million for what is called vindicatory damages, to vindicate him for his constitutional rights. Now, he had also been asking for aggravated damages, saying the behavior of the government agents had been outrageous. The court wasn't very convinced and only gave $1 million in relation to that, and the rest of it is what is called special damages, meaning money he had to pay out of of pocket. So for instance, legal fees, those you have to prove that you spent the money, and then those will be awarded to you.
Good. Thank you very much, our legal analyst, Dion Jackson Miller.